Hello, everyone. I know it's been a while since I put out the Revenge of the Island video, and that's for a few reasons. One, I really do not like this season, and I didn't really want to have to rewatch it. And two, I also had my script erased, so like the last video, I'm gonna go into this one completely blind with no script. I'm just gonna ramble on and on and on about my thoughts. So here's All Stars, and it was a tough season to really rank due to all the preconceived history that the cast had with one another and a lot of the poor choices that were made in general. So here it is. So in last place, I have Joe in the abysmal tier. I almost didn't put her in last because she did survive a vote, but how she played throughout the 3 episodes was so awful that I couldn't overlook it. Um, when it comes to her strategy, she did decide to align with Lightning, which is a good idea because he's one of the few people that she knows and who is on her team, and she needs all the allies she can get. But she instantly turned on him for no reason. This is already a flaw with her during Revenge of the Island, but it was heightened so much more in All Stars. And it came back to bite her in the butt, where Lightning recorded a tape saying that she would regret it, and even her team told Joe that booting Lightning was a mistake, so it just showed how she overplayed her hand. She also was too busy trying to get the upper hand over Heather, and she really just didn't, and she wasn't a good leader this season like she was in Revenge of the Island. You could see that her methods were screwed up in Revenge of the Island, but it did give them a lot of victories. That wasn't the case here. Socially, Jo has never been good, but she was just outright awful in this season. Absolutely no one really liked her. She made Heather seem not bossy, and she's on a team with villains, but they all hated her due to her bossy, overbearing nature. Jo clearly didn't learn from the mistakes of her last season, but the only difference is that she's not on the winning track this season. Challenges, Jo did do well in the first challenge, I will give her that. But in the second challenge, she was kind of meh, and she completely sucked in the third challenge, which is why she ended up going home. Jo didn't benefit from luck whatsoever, but she just played horribly. Jo not only didn't learn from her mistakes in Revenge of the Island, she heightened and flanderized them even more, which caused for an early boot for her here. Jo was really out of her element, and she made bad choices. Willingly. So, Lindsay's the obvious choice for 13th place. So, since, one, she was the first boot, and two, she played really poorly in the one episode she was in. Strategically, it seemed like she didn't want to be there whatsoever, and like she actively was plotting to go home, claiming that nothing was worth playing this game again. So it just showed that her head wasn't in the game or in the season at all. Socially, she wasn't good. She had some conversations with Courtney, but she just ended up annoying Courtney. And I don't remember her having any solid interactions with the Revenge of the Island newbies either. So she was kind of just on an island by herself. When it comes to the challenge, she outright sucked in the challenge, and she forgot how to push. Clearly, her dumbness just took over way too much, and it got worse and worse as the seasons went on, especially since she forgot how to push. When it comes to luck, you could argue that Lindsay was somewhat unlucky in the sense that Sierra jumped in the cart while Courtney was still in it, which slowed Lindsay down exponentially, and she might have done better in the challenge and might have been able to spare herself if that didn't happen. But that's a huge stretch, and what if? The final person in the abysmal tier is Lightning at 12th place. What I could say about Lightning in Revenge of the Island is that he was always great at blending in, despite his loud and obnoxious personality. Lightning should have been able to do the same here, since he was arguably the least villainous person on the villainous vultures, but he just brought way too much attention towards himself. Clearly, Lightning's strategy was the same as it was in Revenge of the Island. Win, 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 win. But that didn't happen whatsoever, as he actively caused his team to lose the second challenge. So his strategy failed. Socially, Lightning was horrible. And I kind of covered this anyways earlier. While Lightning never really had many friends in Revenge of the Island, he was always able to blend in with his teammates and was able to go under the radar. That didn't happen here, and despite the fact that he was on a team with a bunch of vile, disgusting human beings, he was the first boot on the villainous vultures, which is just yikes. When it comes to challenges, Lightning did do well in the first challenge, while he lost the challenge in the second episode due to him not knowing how to count. Yeah. Lightning didn't benefit or get hindered by luck whatsoever. But I will say that he is higher than the other two because he had enough sense to know that booting him would be a mistake. And the team eventually came around to realize that booting Lightning first was a mistake. So that's why he is higher than the other two, despite his huge flaws. So Sam is the first person in my bad tier at 11th place. It's hard for me to talk about Sam in this season for a few reasons. One, he clearly wasn't supposed to be there, as he was just a poor performer in Revenge of the Island. And two, he really didn't do much of anything outside of being a poorly utilized comic relief, fart, and pain magnet joke. So when it comes to his strategy, Sam mentions that he only came back so he can turn into a monster like Dakota. And I'm assuming that he wanted to just win, like in Revenge of the Island, due to his gamer personality, but he never really was able to execute that well. He came close in his final challenge, but obviously that didn't work out. Socially, he did get along with his teammates, which is good, but you could also just argue that they all got along because they are on the heroic hamsters. I feel like Sam should have been able to make it further since there were 4 people from Revenge of the Island on the heroic hamsters, with him, Cameron, Mike, and Zoe. So I feel like he should have stayed over Sierra and he should have used that ROTI bond to get him further. But the fact that he didn't does show that there were some weaknesses there. I will say that the entire team went out of their way to give him food, so it shows how much they did appreciate him. When it comes to challenges, Sam was awful. He was just a pain magnet over and over and over again, and he never really contributed to any of the challenges throughout the first 3 episodes, which was never really the case, especially in Revenge of the Island, where he won the Toxic Rats, one of their only challenges, by himself. He would have won in episode 4, but he ended up cheating to get it done, which isn't like Sam. When it comes to luck, there is an argument that Sam is unlucky, since there have been several times where people were allowed to cheat and it garnered them victory. Like in Masters of Disaster, no, not in Masters of Disasters, in Oceans 8 or 9, episode 13 of Total Drama Action, the Screaming Gaffers were supposed to get Lashana, but they left her in there and they're still allowed to win. In Jamaica Me Sweat, episode 11 of World Tour, Alejandro was blatantly allowed to cheat and sabotage to get DJ out, but he wasn't disqualified instead. I felt like they only mentioned Sam's quote-unquote cheating so they could spare Alejandro from being eliminated here, and so they could find a reason for Sam to get booted. Either way, while Sam was a bit unlucky, Sam just wasn't focused at all in this season, and he just deteriorated from his already not great performance from Revenge of the Island. So at 10th place, I have Alejandro. And I know this is going to be controversial since he made it to 6th place. But as I've mentioned before, and placement is not the main reason as to why I'm going to rank someone high or low on this tier ranking. It's based on how and what they did while in the game. And from what Alejandro did in the game, his game was atrocious. I will say that he played well in the first 3 episodes, but he lasted 10 episodes and he played horribly in his last 7 episodes. So strategically, he does show that he does put some thought into this as he decides that he's going to pretend to be more injured than he really is. But it seemed like he did this more to make Heather feel bad instead of for strategic benefits. And even when it was revealed, it only made his case worse, as it didn't benefit him whatsoever. What was so unlike Alejandro from World Tour is that he actively decided that he was not going to make any alliances and he was going to be a lone wolf. That did him no favors whatsoever, because it only made him a target for everyone else, but it made him expendable too. He just wasn't all the way there strategically, and him turning on Heather was very, very, very stupid. But I also blame her for that as well. Alejandro was just all over the place strategically this season, and he wasn't very focused. I will say that he was pretty solid in challenges still. He helped them win in the first challenge. He won in the merch challenge, and he almost won in his final challenge. He wasn't really a bust. And technically, you could argue that he technically won for them in episode 4, but I already covered that in the Sam section. So he was overall decent in challenges. When it comes to his social game, it was abysmal. Obviously, in World Tour, his social game was great because he was putting on an act and he was being a gentleman while he did his villainous stuff behind the scenes. But now that everyone knows that he's a villain, obviously he couldn't use that same strategy overall. He tried to charm people like Justin, and while it worked somewhat, it wore off very quickly because people saw through his act. I covered in the merge how he blew off everyone and pretty much told them to screw off, and how he didn't need any allies, which was very, very, very stupid. Since everyone knows you need allies and you need to be liked in order to make it far, and he actively went out of his way to be disliked and to have no allies. And when it comes to luck, this is the main reason why Alejandro's so low. He needed a lot of luck to make it to 6th place. He did fine in his first 3 episodes, but in the 4th episode, he would have gone home if Sam wasn't called out for cheating. And like I mentioned in the Sam section, a lot of people were allowed to cheat. So in previous seasons. So if this was allowed, Alejandro would have been gone in episode 4. Alejandro would have been gone in episode 6 if he didn't steal Heather's immunity idol. And in actual Survivor, you're not allowed to steal immunity idols. So you could say that Alejandro was allowed to do that, though technically he shouldn't have been allowed to. He needed to win in episodes 7 and 8 in order to not be booted, but that was fair, whatever. And in episode 9, he would have been booted for sure if Cameron wasn't injured and evacuated out of the game. So he made it through more than half of the season with nothing of his own doing, but a lot of luck and convenience. So I'm going to start off my unlucky / potential tier with Sierra at 9th place. Though I wanted her to go home a lot earlier than she did, when you actually look at the game she played, it wasn't horrible. So when it comes to strategy, she did absolutely fumble the bag here, as she was focused on Kim Cody, and nothing else. In World Tour, Sierra always knew how to position herself to the point where people would need her for a vote or what have you. And that wasn't really the case here. But even despite that, it seemed like she was actually decently positioned on the heroic hamsters throughout her entire time on the season. Socially, despite her craziness being ramped up, she fit in with the heroic hamsters. She was right there with them, handing Sam food once he returned from Boney Island. No one on the heroic hamsters really targeted her, and even when she was booted, it wasn't due to the heroic hamsters. So she blended in with her team well, and she didn't make herself an obvious standout like Courtney or Lindsay or even Duncan to some extent did. And she was actually getting along with Cameron before she blew that up. When it comes to challenges, Sierra was not as good in challenges as she was in World Tour. She obviously still did well in the first episode and in the Moon Madness episode, which was episode 5, I believe, but she lost the challenge for them in episode 7 She dug too far in episode 2, and she wasn't the most focused in episode 3. When it comes to luck, I do think Sierra was unlucky. Her vote, out of all the votes in the entire franchise, was very unusual due to the fact that the losing tribe didn't vote out someone from their own team. The winning tribe was able to choose someone to get voted out, and that was the only reason why Sierra was voted out when she did. If the heroic hamsters were able to vote, there's a good chance that Sierra actually makes it to the merge, and who knows how she would have done outside of that. So that's why she was in the potential tier, since her vote out was extremely irregular, and the twist was announced last minute, so it wasn't like they were aware of this in the beginning of the episode. So at 8th place, I have Heather. Honestly, it's kind of ironic since I kind of crapped all over Heather's game throughout her last 3 seasons. But I think it's this season in All Stars, which is technically her worst performing season, where I'm able to get more respect for Heather as a player and I see more of her strengths. Heather's able to blend in very well with the villainous vultures. And I do think the theme definitely benefits her here. She doesn't do anything that makes her an overt target like she did in all 3 of her seasons. And Heather knew how to push people to make them into bigger targets, as you see with her and Joe. Even after Joe's booted, Heather manages to go under the radar on the villainous vultures, and no one really sees her as a threat. And this is while having Gwen and Courtney on her team at the time. It was a smart idea to align with Alejandro, but her doing it to instantly turn on him afterwards was very, very, very dumb. Because while she was able to go under the radar, she essentially had no allies either. I criticized Alejandro for this, and I criticized Heather for this, too. Also, her leaving her immunity idol behind is just a really, really, really dumb choice. So I kind of covered her strategy and social skills at once, but this season definitely had Heather at her best socially, as she was able to convince everyone to boot Alejandro, and the only person she had major problems with was Joe, who everyone disliked more than her. Heather definitely improved socially here. When it comes to challenges, Heather was pretty mediocre. I don't remember her thriving or flopping at either end here, so I can't really say much there. When it comes to luck, I do think Heather was unlucky, which is ironic because I always criticize her for having too much luck in her prior seasons. And I mentioned it in Alejandro's section, but I'll cover it here. In Survivor, when you find an immunity idol, no one can take it from you. It's a production rule that is solidified. So that immunity idol should have been Heather's. And the fact that they let Alejandro steal it when that technically shouldn't be allowed, that is where I find Heather to be very unlucky. If that didn't happen, Heather makes it to the merge, and she probably makes it further than Alejandro did. Ended up going. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential here. But Heather did make some mistakes and didn't have luck on her side. So at 7th place, I have Duncan. When it comes to his strategy this season, this is the one season where Duncan really doesn't have strategy. Duncan wasn't really focused at all on the game this season. He only came back for Gwen, and throughout the first several episodes, he's just focusing on Gwen, really. He saves her from getting hit in episode 3, and he's doing everything he can to repair his relationship with Gwen. He didn't really join any alliances. He didn't really plot at all. Duncan was just underwhelming strategically, and while he didn't make many strategic mistakes, he didn't make many good moves strategically at all either. Socially, I don't think Duncan was bad at this element, or at least in the first part of the season. He blended in really well with the villainous vultures. No one was targeting him, and he was able to somewhat cackle out a joke of Joe's, so there were some good elements there. And even when he was swapped onto the heroic hamsters, he did stand out like a sore thumb, but he was able to endear to people like Zoe, which does show some of his social skills and even some of his improvements. Where I think he fell off was that after his relationship with Gwen broke up, no one really trusted him, and Duncan didn't have any allies whatsoever, and he didn't go out of his way to make any allies at all. He was too concerned with proving that he's a bad guy and not that he was a good guy, to the point where it deteriorated his social game. When it comes to the challenges, Duncan was okay in them. I don't really remember him doing poorly in any of them. I do remember that he helped them out in episodes 4, episode 5, episode 6, so on and so forth. But he wasn't really a beast at any of them either. Just kind of in between overall. When it comes to luck, I do think that Duncan somewhat benefited from luck. While it isn't 100% sure, it looks like Duncan had a good chance of going home in episode 5 had Cameron not quit. But even if he did get booted, he probably would have just been switched over to the villainous vultures anyways, since that was the twist. And I do think that if the heroic hamsters end up voting in episode 7, there's a good chance he goes home there too. So there were a lot of icky situations that weren't really in his control that got him to the merge and 8th place in general. So that's why Duncan is in the mediocre tier. So in 6th place, I have Cameron. When it comes to strategy, there really wasn't anything impressive there, unlike in Revenge of the Island, but Cameron was well positioned throughout the entire season. On the heroic hamsters, he had Mike and Zoe, as well as Sam and Sierra, who he got along with, and absolutely no one was targeting him. Even when he was switched over to the villainous vultures, he was a target for like a brief millisecond, as he was the new guy on the team, but he ended up being spared there. But I will say that it had nothing to do with his own gameplay, as it was mainly Alejandro and Heather being extremely stupid and not keeping the team united to boot him. He did start to deteriorate more and more strategically due to Sierra obsessing over him, and his increasing paranoia even after Sierra left, due to Mal, so he kind of became more of a Bubba boy as the season went on. Socially, he wasn't bad this season. He was able to get along with Sierra before she blew that up. He got along with all the heroic hamsters for the most part, except for Courtney, but Courtney's just irrelevant in that sense. When he was on the villainous vultures, he was able to lay low enough for him to escape that part of the game, and he was able to bond with Gwen too, so that's an improvement. When Cameron is injured, people do feel bad for him and they want to avenge him, so it shows how much they did care for him. When it comes to the challenges, honestly, I might be incorrect, but I don't remember Cameron thriving at any sense in this season. That was his strong point in Revenge of the Island, but it kind of deteriorated in this season, as he became more paranoid and a lot more reliant on Mike and Zoe. It was very disappointing, especially after his great winning game in the previous season. When it comes to luck, I don't think Cameron needed luck at all. Like Brick in the previous season, Cameron deciding to quit was stupid in episode 5 because he wasn't going to be sent home anyways, and if he wanted to, he could have just got his team to send home Sierra in that episode. But I guess that also showed how well Sierra was positioned at that point in the season, despite her antics. Cameron had to get injured for him to get disqualified and to get booted, which ended up saving Alejandro in that episode. If that doesn't happen, I predict Cameron makes it a lot further. There was the rigged voting against him in episode 8, but that was because of Mal, and no one was actually planning on booting him at that point of time. While Cameron's game was not as excellent as it was in Revenge of the Island, or even really great, there wasn't much bad about it, despite it being kind of underwhelming. At number 5, I have Mike. Like in the last video, I find it very hard to talk about Mike, because whenever he's thriving, it's always due to his personalities, and never due to anything that he does. It's even worse this time because Mike is absent after episode 6, despite making it all the way to the finale. Strategically, there really isn't much to talk about. He had Zoe and Cameron on his team, which helped, and he also had Sam, who he competed with, and Sierra, who was drawn to them as well. He was in a good position throughout the season, and I don't think that would have changed even if Mike was active throughout the season, despite him not really making any strategic moves. Socially, he was fine. I kind of mentioned how his team was set up and how everyone got along with him for the most part. I'm not holding what Mal does against Mike. Duncan was untrustworthy of him, but that never really went anywhere. When it comes to challenges, I do remember Mike helping in episodes 2 and episodes 3, and he didn't really do poorly in the other ones. When it comes to luck, while I think Mike would have been fine regardless, he was lucky that Mal took over in the second half and was able to thrive in the second half for Mike. While he would have been in a good position with Zoe and Cameron being there with him, we don't know how Mike would have handled the second half of the season, so I can't really give him too much credit. Due to all this, that's why he's in the solid tier and not in the good or great tier. Simply put, he wasn't active enough throughout the season, though he probably would have made it to the end anyways, due to how him and his friends were positioned. As I'm recording this, I am unsure as to what tier I'm going to put Scott in, but I am positive in ranking him as 4th, as his gameplay this season was actually pretty solid, especially after his Revenge of the Island performance. We see Alejandro having to deal with everyone knowing he's a villain in this season, and me obviously not thinking he played well, and even Heather had to deal with that in action, which had poor to mixed results at best. Scott lasting as long as he did and making it further than he did in Revenge of the Island, while competing right after that season, is very impressive. Though a part of it is slightly disappointing, which I will get to later. Strategically, honestly, Scott really didn't have a strategy. While he did go under the radar throughout the entire season, and wasn't as strategic, it was disappointing to see him like this, especially after he was always thinking and always coming up with plans in Revenge of the Island. I also do think that the teams being set up as villains and heroes benefited him tremendously. Socially, he actually wasn't bad this season. While he didn't have close allies outside of Courtney and Gwen through Courtney, Scott never really pissed anyone off. Even the likes of Cameron, Mike, and Zoe weren't pissed off at him throughout the season, so it showed that he did improve in some elements. And he did seem like he got along with Duncan at some points throughout the season, too. When it comes to challenges, Scott outright sucked. There's no way around it. Scott was never really that good in challenges in Revenge of the Island, so it isn't really shocking. But at the same time, you could say that he didn't need to win challenges, because his position was pretty good. Scott didn't really need luck because he was never in danger throughout the entire season, so that is impressive. Some people think that because you're active and you're plotting and you're strategizing and you're doing all that stuff means you're playing a good game. But if you looked throughout my list, throughout the last 4 videos, some of the under-the-radar players end up ranking very high, and that is why Scott is here, though it's disappointing that he wasn't at least somewhat strategic, because I think he could have done better. I think him turning on Courtney at the Final 5 was the dumbest idea ever, because she was the only person who's going to take him to the Final 5, and with her gone, he, of course, didn't make it to the Final 2. So that is a huge oversight, and that's why I put him here and not higher. So at 3rd, I have Courtney. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I was too rough on her performance in Island, and maybe I should have put her in a higher tier, though all of my points are still relatively valid. In All Stars, strategically, she was struggling at first since she was on the heroic hamsters and she didn't know how to adapt to how the team handled things. She had a lucky swap where she was placed on the villainous vultures, where she was able to make up with Gwen and align with Scott, and aligning with those two carried her throughout most of the season, which was very good for her. Courtney learned how to relax and she learned how to just let things happen. Of course, she made that list and everything just went absolutely haywire. In All Stars, socially, this might have been her best. Though I mentioned earlier she did struggle on the heroic hamsters because she couldn't socially or strategically adapt, but she thrived once she was on the villainous vultures, and no one was really upset with her. Though that did end up going awry slowly throughout the merge, through the stupid Cameron mess and then the list, which caused her to be booted and caused everyone to turn on her. When it comes to challenges, Courtney was actually pretty solid. She helped her team, especially the villainous vultures, win a few of the challenges, like in episode 7, I think episode 6. And she almost won her boot episode challenge too, and she would have won if Chris hadn't changed the rules. So Courtney was actually pretty solid from what I can recollect. She was very well positioned throughout the entire season, and she almost didn't screw up. And this was the furthest she made in this season without having to debut midway like she did in action. So she was proud of herself for that. When it comes to luck, I do think she was slightly unlucky, especially in her final episode where Chris changed the rules of the challenge once Courtney started doing well. So you could tell Chris McLean clearly wanted Courtney to go home, so she was unlucky in that element. At the same time, she was in an awkward position throughout the first 3 episodes, and if the swap hadn't happened, I'm pretty sure Courtney would have been booted a lot earlier in the season. So she was lucky and unlucky in that sense. And the list was just really, really, really not smart, especially with her doodling over the people. So in second place, I have Gwen. It's interesting going throughout the show and throughout the gameplay within each season and realizing that Gwen's a very strong player, even in the 2 seasons where she didn't do the best. In both scenarios, she almost stayed, and there are always a bunch of contrivances that had her go instead. So it showed her skill sets as a player that she never had a smooth sailing boot. So in All Stars, I do think she benefited from being on the villain's tribe due to her being the least villainous person there, but she didn't stand out as an obvious target. She also had Duncan on her team for the first set of the season, and she was able to make amends with Courtney while being friends with Cameron, which did help her throughout the latter part of the Villainous Vultures and throughout most of her game. She was also able to get on the good side of Zoe, which did help her later on throughout the season. I don't think her turning on Courtney was as bad of a move as it was for Scott, since no one would have taken her to the final 2 anyways, though there was a chance that Zoe might have taken her to the final 2, especially in comparison to Scott. Overall, Gwen was well positioned throughout the entire season, and even her elimination was kind of contrived here. Socially, it kind of goes along with what I said earlier. She got along with mostly everyone. She was well positioned throughout the entire season. She knew how to make up with people. She knew how to bring people in as new friends, and she knew how to bring people in as new allies. So Gwen was strong in that element. Gwen was pretty decent in challenges from what I remember. I know she did well in episode 7, and she did help throughout a lot of the other challenges of the Villainous Vultures. And even if she didn't do well, she never really flopped in the challenges. There really wasn't much notable throughout her performances throughout the merge. I will say that. When it comes to luck, I don't know if she benefited or was hindered by luck. I know in her boot episode, she shouldn't have been 4th since since she was one of the few who did bring something back for Chris, especially where Scott and Mike didn't, especially Scott didn't bring anything. So you could say she was unlucky there, but chances are she probably would have been third anyways. So overall, Gwen played a pretty solid game this season. So there was never any doubt or hesitation as to who was going to be number one, and that was going to be Zoe, whether I or anyone liked it or not. Socially, she completely dominated this season. She was in a good position with Cameron and Mike being on the hero campsters, as well as Sam, who she competed with on the previous season. And even Sierra started warming up to her, so that helped her tremendously. Throughout the match, she was able to befriend and align with Gwen, and she even had Courtney trusting her with information at times here and there. And this all happened when Mike started going AWOL and Cameron was booted. Even Scott wasn't mad at her or held any grudges against her this season. I think literally the only person who had any sort of issue with her was Alejandro, but he had no allies, and Courtney, who tried to target her, but she had no allies at that point. Socially and strategically, she was in a good position throughout the entire season. Even though strategically, she never really plotted or made big moves. But sometimes you don't need to make big moves or plots like that if you're in a good position, like she was. When it comes to the challengers, Zoe completely dominated, and I think her performance this season is the best challenge dominance performance ever. And the best thing about it is that Zoe didn't need to win any of these challenges really, because she was in a good position throughout the entire season. I don't recall Zoe needing any sort of luck, like at all, throughout the season, which makes her performance even greater. Though it was weird how she went from someone who wasn't good at challenges to being a challenge beast, and it never was explained. So that was kind of weird, but that's just more a preference thing. Either way, in my opinion, Zoe was the best player in All Stars, and she deserves being number one here. So here's my ranking list of the All Star cast based on their gameplay skills. I feel pretty good about it. It makes sense to me. I know I've said this for the last 4 videos, but looking at it now, I really feel comfortable with this list, and I hope you all understand why I place certain people where I place them. So I have the packet 2 ranking to do, and then I'm going to discuss the entire TD cast in one video. And I'm not going to divide it by each iteration. I'm just going to talk about them as an overall player, their strengths and weaknesses, and rank it from there. So thank you all for watching this, and I will see and hear from you all soon.